A very good afternoon or good morning for some of you, and thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar, Future-Proofing Organizations, a Culture of Transformation. I'll just go through some housekeeping rules before we get started to make sure that everybody's on board. This is in webinar format, so you'll notice that most of you, if not all of you, are muted. However, you do have the opportunity and the option to submit questions through the Q&A option that's available to you, or of course in the chat box, and I already see some of the messages coming through. So please do keep these coming through. We're going to run for about 45 minutes, and then we'll take some questions and answers at the end of the webinar. So as I said, please make sure to have these come through either in the Q&A section or the chat box. With me on the call is my colleague Yoshi, who will be producing the webinar and will be managing and curating any of the questions that are coming in. And he'll bulk them up together as we go later on and make sure that we try to get to as many of them as possible. So to get started, and before I jump into the topic, I really want to thank you for joining us today. I know how important this topic certainly is to me, but I suspect for many of you as well, this notion of the elusive culture within organizations and how do we make that happen. So today I'm going to share with you, of course, where we are, why this is so important, but more importantly, some of the tips or the elements that make up a culture of transformation. And right at the end, we're going to actually show you a success case study that's become quite famous, as a matter of fact, in how they did it, or more importantly, the results that they've achieved. So let's get started right into it. And before we get into content, I want to share with you an interesting statistic, I suppose, on where we stand. This was a study done by Deloitte a couple of years ago, and they talked to 7,000 respondents from 130 different countries. 92% of executives said that organizational redesign is a crucial priority. Redesign, that is, right? Another 80% said that culture is a very important issue. So we recognize that most people in organizations, particularly at the executive level, recognize how important and critical this is. Now, this is where it got interesting, though. 28% of executives report that they understand their organizational culture. Only 28%. Now, that is obviously a red flag that's coming out right there. Further to that, only 12% of the executives say that their company is driving the right culture. So there seems to be a major gap between what we feel or how we feel about culture and where we think we are. And that's really concerning. And to me, oftentimes, I think it's the messaging that we get wrong as well. All too often, we hear about leaders who are trying to get everybody moving in the right direction, but it's not necessarily them moving along with it. And as we say, feet talk. So it has to be more than lip service or just telling people what to do. We have to lead by example, as we always know. As an organization, it goes even further. All too often we hear companies that say, look, we put our customers first. It's all about them. It's very important. But then the CEO's got the reserved spot in front of the front door. That's not necessarily customers first. So there's that often the disconnect with our desired state and our actions on a day-to-day basis. And that's something that we really have to change. And it really comes down to the people in the organization. Very often when help is needed at what we call the fingertips, the frontline people of the organization, management tends to use a fly swat approach. I'm very busy, come back later. You should know how to do this by now. And a number of other things. We don't necessarily engage them. And I find it gets even worse as we go further up the organization. We end up with what we call hierarchical warfare. And that's something that we need to address. So it's a bit of that sense of unity and how do we bring it together. Now, we're all probably very familiar with Peter Drucker's words, culture eats strategy for breakfast. I don't necessarily agree 100% with that statement. I don't understand why culture and strategy can't sit down together at the breakfast table and share a meal. It's not that one is more important than the other. They actually work hand in hand. You see, if you look at this and you look at the fact that for almost every organization, our mission or our vision for that matter and values tend to drive the organization. And if we align the two aspects, strategy, which is our guiding path, and culture, which is our driving path, I think we can end up with a lot better results. So when you look at that, you've got strategy and culture on one side, you've got goals, but you've got values on the other, you've got objectives, but then you have practices, and last but not least, you've got activities, which of course are behaviors under the culture. And the more that we align these elements, I think the results start to show for themselves. And I'll give you an example later on, as I mentioned. But you see, strategy and culture are aligned, and they do go hand in hand. It's not that one has a priority over the other. And I don't believe that an organization that wants to succeed can drive one or the other. We need both the guiding path and the driving path at the same time. So what can we do? I think it comes down to employee expectations. And there's a few things to keep in mind. Now, I want to revisit an age-old concept or theory that we talk about, which is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Now, we think back about this, and we've got the sense of psychological needs, safety, belonging, self-esteem, and self-actualization. I believe this is outdated, and certainly when it comes to corporations. While this serves the purpose in our personal lives, I think there needs to be something done about it when it comes to the business world, and particularly our employees. I think the first two levels remain the same. Psychological is basic. Our safety is our individualistic need that's there. But there is something that has to be factored in, and that's what we call the managerial level. And that tends to be missing, and I'll talk about that in a moment as well. And then we move into the belonging, which is still there. But I would rephrase the notion of self-esteem and self-actualization, where we have to start to look at contribution and growth. So that Maslow's hierarchy, while it served a purpose, I think as we move to corporate, it becomes a six-layered or six-tiered element, and we look at managerial contribution and growth as really key components that start to make it in there. Now, when we talk about basic, this is really the simple stuff we're looking for from our employer, from our organization. We're looking for collaboration, two-way, integrity, respect, help, skills. All of these are part and parcel of what we're looking for. On an individual level, we're looking for justice, equality, impartiality. On the managerial level, that extra level there, we are desperately seeking enablement, feedback, effective leadership that's there, a work-life balance. And I think that's really tends to be missing today in organizations. We think we do it, but we tend to fail, or we set it to the side in lieu of results and business functions and so on. Our sense of belonging, on the other hand, remains as critical as it was in the original hierarchy. The sense of involvement and company identity, social connection, and team are so important. But as you remember, I've switched out self-esteem and self-actualization for contribution and growth. And I think this is where things start to change for companies that have gotten culture right. And that's about community, hospitality, fellowship. It's that sense of engagement in how I contribute as an individual, just as much as an organization contributes back to me. And then we have growth, the element of service, development, human character, quality, and satisfaction, innovation that falls into that. We have a responsibility to one another within organizations to deliver on each and every one of these levels here, either individually or collectively, and we have to work through that. So I'm going to share with you the 5 elements that we talk about when it comes to culture transformation. Now, the first thing before I do is thinking the fact that C-suite has to start to think more like marketers. Our organization as an entity in itself requires marketing skill sets. That means we have to think about it in the context of brand and campaign management, recognizing that we've got to get the word out. We've got to really put some effort into this to make sure that we get the right culture of transformation. Now, the first of the 5 elements is what we refer to as employee centricity and experience. It's focusing on the true customer and what they're going through on a day-to-day basis. See, if we go back to our fingertips, it's really about serving the fingertips. The customer is that of the internal customer, not our external customer. And the moment we focus on them and we focus on the true customer, I believe the results come for the external one. They are our representatives. They are our ambassadors and our champions on a daily basis. Not only is it about serving them, it's about serving them well and making sure that we create an experience where people genuinely bring what we call bring their heart to work. They're full of emotion and compassion and this desire and joy, and they really want to serve everybody else around them. This really comes down to the ambiance, the vibe that we create within the organization. Can we electrify that within that? And that comes down to that element of empathy, working with others, caring for others within the organization, that sense of compassion that we talked about earlier on, innovation, lending oneself to the other, that element of contribution and growth starts to come in here. Now, on the second side, I urge you to do your homework. Not all employees are created equal, as much as we'd like to think so, but they're not. In fact, we've got people in different departments with different needs. And half the time, it looks like it's psychological warfare that's going on between people. Procurement is fighting with service is fighting with sales, and we've got customers somewhere thrown in there, and that's got to change. That means understanding the individuality of our employees, but at the same time, the collective and unified good. We are done with the days where we've got this blanket approach that's there. And I believe that there are three types of people in organizations, and that's just not me. Gallup surveys show the same results there. That in most organizations, there's about 20% of people that we refer to as super positive. These people are just simply outright excited. Everything you do with them, they're happy about it, they're excited, they contribute, they do whatever they can. And for those of you that either have children or remember when you were a child, you might think back to the storybook and of course the cartoon Winnie the Pooh. And there's a few characters, and when I see the Gallup's results, this is what comes to mind. That top 20% remind me of the character Tigger. And if you've ever seen the cartoon or of course read the book, Tigger is this super excited character, super positive. In fact, his song goes bouncy, 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 bounce. And he's one of those characters where, let's go do this. Yes, absolutely, I'm in. This is a bit difficult. No, we can do it. It's that sense of positivity. And the Gallup survey shows it's actually just under 20%, it's about 19 and change percent, that people in organizations represent Tiggers. They're that excited, no matter what happens, they are there for us. They contribute effectively. Now, there's another 20% in organizations that are just outright negative. There is nothing you can do that turns these individuals around. You give them a raise of 5%, they're wondering why it's not 10%. You actually give them a promotion, they tell you, well, I've been waiting for that for 18 months. You move them to a bigger office, they say, well, the guy next to him, he's got an even bigger office. There's simply no satisfying these individuals. And if I go back to my Winnie the Pooh story, these are the Eeyores. And if you know the character, you'll know what I'm talking about. They're just exhausted with everything. They're negative about everything. They don't support any of the initiatives that's there. And that tends to be quite toxic for an organization. We've got another 60% that's still missing. And these are those indifferent almost people. They're not necessarily positive or negative. They're just sitting there. They go through their day to day. And in our Winnie the Pooh story, that actually is Winnie. This is the person, these are the people that say, show me the honey. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't mean show me the money, but rather the honey. And honey comes in different forms. It's the level of motivation that we create for our individuals. And that's why I go back to the notion that we have a sense of individuality within the organization, within the collective mindset that's there. And we really have to do our homework to recognize, where do our people sit? What is it that they're looking for? What is it that excites them to get more out of this? What is that honey that they're looking for? All too often, I talk to managers and leaders who are so focused on the Eeyores, that bottom 20%, because they feel the toxicity and they want to get rid of them. They want to turn them around. I can tell you right now, you can try for decades. It's not going to happen. One or two might get by, but certainly not enough to make a difference. It's that 60% that we tend to overlook. Those that are simply looking for a nudge in the right direction, a reason to be ambassadors and champions of our culture and of our organization. And that's where we want to focus. It's that effort that we can put into these individuals to elevate them. Because if we don't, I can tell you the Eeyores are looking for the Winnie the Pooh so they can drag them over to the coffee machine or the water cooler and tell them how nonsense the work-life balance is, how horrible the culture is there. And that's not something that we're looking to have happen. So as much as we value our Tiggers of the organization, the superstars, the super positive people, we've got to really look out to the Winnie the Pooh in the organization. They make up 60% of almost every organization that's there. Now, I want you to change our thinking a little bit and realize that when I say do our homework, it's also about diversity. It's about recognizing the inclusivity within an organization. Today, as leaders, those of you that are people managers on the call, you recognize the fact that you've got different generations, from baby boomers to Gen Xers to Gen Y to Gen Z. And there's that dynamic is changing. You've got different gender requirements. You've got different experience requirements that's there. We need to do our homework and understand our people and know who's there and their specific needs. Now, when we talk about this notion of developing a strategic plan, and I think this is a very important element here. When we talk about a strategic plan, there is one that exists for culture. It goes hand in hand. And this is a study that was published in the Harvard Business Review, and it's been redone time and time again. And it shows that there's what we call a service profit chain, that if we focus on internal service quality, that employee satisfaction, it leads to proper retention and productivity, which subsequently leads to our customer satisfaction and loyalty, and it lends itself to revenue growth and profitability. That means the correlation is there. And as much as we're constantly worried about, look, I'll deal with culture later, I need to get strategy right, we need to deliver on our results, we know the results can only happen through people. And the more that we look after them and we look at that, what we call the internal service quality, I think we'll see results come behind, following through that. And I'll share, as I said, a case study at the end of the webinar that'll demonstrate hard results, that when you put that effort into employee satisfaction, you will get the results that you're looking for from a business perspective. So when you're developing a strategic plan, I urge you to identify your corporate culture. Determine what you want your culture to look like. A few years ago, I was with a client and we sat down, it was the executive team, and I asked a very simple question: what's your culture? And they gave me a number of answers, and then the following response, the question was, is it really what you want it to be? And there was dead silence. And that's okay. Simply not knowing or thinking we have a culture, but not knowing or realizing that it's not the culture that we want is just an important eye-opener than anything else. So identifying that as part of our strategic plan is critical. But then it's about doing something about it, and that involves aligning it with strategy. It goes hand in hand. It's not a standalone initiative. All too often I sit down with CEOs that tell me, yeah, we're going to launch into our culture and we're going to do this for a year. Culture is not a one-year initiative. It's not a year and a half or a two-year initiative. It is lifelong. It is the duration of the organization. What happens over time is it evolves. We have to make sure that it transforms itself on an ongoing basis. It doesn't become static, but it is not a standalone initiative. It requires all hands on deck, and it has to be part of our strategic initiative or plan. And lastly, in this area, set the success measures. Recognize what it is that you want to achieve and how do you intend to measure that success. Is it through revenue growth, productivity? Is it our people satisfaction? Is it referrals? Is it our retention of staff? It has to be clearly defined so we can actually achieve it. It is, again, what gets measured gets done is the old adage, and I think it very much applies here. It is not a nice to have, it is a must have, but that means it also is a must measure. I want to talk about these last couple of elements because they're rather important to me, and it's about having an evidence-based HR culture or human capital culture. This is knowing that when we introduce this to our employees, we need to engage and understand the results that are coming out there. And it's not about the individual element. I think we've got to shed the idea that we are a team of footballers, individualistic in nature. Everybody's doing their thing. For those of you that are following the Euro Cup right now or are football fans, you know that a team cannot win if they're individualistic in nature. And I find that when we look at some of the annual engagement surveys that are being done out there, they're individualistic. We're asking one individual in a moment of time what's going on. And with so much that's changed and evolved in this particular workplace, in this environment in the workplace, we have to adapt to it. There are new technologies, the platforms that are out there that allow you to be more dynamic when it comes to this here. So it's the idea of moving from a team of footballers to a football team. It's about recognizing the individual contribution, however, the collective and unified good. So when we're measuring and looking for that evidence-based culture within the organization, it is really about that driving the greater good. It's not for any one individual. So we have to recognize their individuality, their needs as individuals. However, it's about bringing that culture into one. It's only one company. It's not multiple companies we're trying to run. It's not multiple departments that you're trying to create a culture for. You can't have one culture for service and another one for sales and one more for production and for manufacturing and distribution and so on. That's not how it works. It is about creating that football team that's united, that's driving towards that one cause. And when we talk about measures, I think it's important that we recognize the kind of measures that we're looking for. What do I mean by this here? If you're using an annual engagement survey, recognize that by the time you're assessing the results and looking at them, your organization has changed. They're static in nature. It's once a year. In some organizations, it's once every 2 years. By the time you're getting the results, you're not able to act on them. And most of the time, you're not measuring the critical elements, such as respect, credibility, identity, team dynamic, collaboration, communication, and support. All of these elements that really make up a great culture. So make sure that you have the right dashboard in place to be able to share the right information. And more importantly, think about it in these 3 elements. The first of which is reliability. You see, an organization must be considered reliable for its employees to say, I want to stay here and I want to give everything I've got. It has to be an organization that's deeply rooted in its fundamentals and its values. It's not something that we put up on a wall, the poster, we pass by those values, but that's all they are, a poster and words on a wall. It has to be rooted within the organization. We have to be able to live and feel the values that are there. More importantly, there's a level of consistency in everything that we do. Our word is our bond. And when we say something, we have to act on it. And we have to be consistent in the way we treat employees and we look after them. It's not a fad. And as I said earlier on, it's not a standalone initiative that while we're running through a culture transformation initiative, we're doing everything possible to get the best results in our surveys. And then we go back to the way things were. That simply does not work. So we've got to make sure that we keep that in mind as well. Now, I want to talk about this last component before I move into that case study. And this is about making it memorable. You see, like a product campaign, we have to ensure that it provides a unique experience. We talk a lot about something referred to as moments of truth. And these are never to be repeated opportunities to distinguish ourselves in a memorable fashion from each and every one of our competitors. And often when I talk about these moments of truth, people tell me, oh, yes, in the marketplace. Well, when I talk about competitors, I'm not just talking about who you're competing for the end user, the customer with. I'm talking about your competition for your top talent, your key staff, your people that are out there. And it's our responsibility to create moments of truth for them, just like we do so for our end user and our customer. That's where we differentiate ourselves in a memorable fashion. Let me tell you what I'm talking about here. Now, for most of us, when we talk about expectations or these moments of truth, we talk about 3 layers. There's the implicit, there's the expected, but then there's that with the things that impress us and delight us. And I want to put us in a customer's perspective right now rather than an employee perspective, because I think this will resonate with you a little bit more. Now, before this crisis, I used to travel an awful lot. In fact, I used to travel about 160 to 180 days a year. That's no longer the case, obviously, but it used to happen. That meant I stayed in a lot of hotels. Now, I'm going to use the hospitality sector in hotels. I'm going to share with you a story, and I think you might, it might sound familiar to you, as a matter of fact. Now, when I book a hotel, there are certain things I consider implicit. I don't go looking for them. I don't double check whether or not this is there. This is stuff like the TV, the bed, and whether or not there are towels in the room or soap, or even that it's clean. I assume that these are all there. These are implicit needs that I have. I don't have to think about them. I know they're simply there. But then there's what we call expected needs. So nowadays I have certain expectations that there will be a satellite wall-mounted TV, that of course I'll have Wi-Fi. There might be a mini bar with some fresh juices or water for me to drink. There's a tea and coffee facility, and heck, better yet, an espresso machine. These have become expectations today. So there are things that I simply don't think about, the implicit needs, and then there's my expectation. Now, I'm going to share a story with you from a few years ago. I checked into a hotel, as I normally do, and I think some of you, again, may recognize this. If you stay in a hotel, and many of us do just about the same thing when we enter the room for the very first time. Now, there was a study done many, many years ago that noted that the number one thing we tend to do when we get into our hotel room is check the bathroom. Now, I don't know why that is, whether we're obsessed with the cleanliness. Is it maybe those little tiny shampoo bottles that we want to take with us when we check out and stuff them into our luggage? Whatever the reason, that seems to be our obsession with the bathroom. For some others, some other travelers, they would rate in the surveys, it's the comfort of the bed or the view out the window. So it's one or the other, but typically the number one response is the bathroom. And a few years ago, I'm exhausted, I've traveled, it was for work, got into my hotel room, I put my bag down, and lo and behold, like I do every time, I peered into the bathroom to see what it looked like. And sure enough, on the side of the bathtub, there was one of these, a little rubber duck. Now, my first thought was, housekeeping hasn't done their job. And that was a little bit aggravating for me, but as I looked a little bit closer, it was perfectly placed. The logo, like this one here, was actually on the duck. And there was a little card tied to its neck, and it said, "Enjoy simpler times." And of course, and it was signed by the management. So naturally, I was curious. I called downstairs and I said, "What's with the duck?" He said, "Sir, we've got a lot of visitors, travelers who are business travelers, are tired. We thought that maybe you'd like to draw a nice bubble bath, think back to childhood days, just relax and enjoy your time and your evening with us." And I thought to myself, that's rather pleasant. That to me became known as the duck factor. And as you've probably guessed, one, I've taken the duck. So whatever it costs them, 20, 25 cents to make these things, they know that the customers are going to take them, and they're happy to do so. I've got, well, now 14 ducks in my office and many more. I collect these. In fact, nowadays, when I go to a hotel, I'm constantly looking for the duck. And I mean that metaphorically speaking. I'm not looking for a literal duck, but I'm looking for what I've come to now identify as the duck factor. And this is really that moment of truth. It's that differentiator that makes me think back about a certain experience and say, wow, I love it. And I tell the tale right here. It is one of those experiences. What I don't get is why in organizations, we don't think we should be applying the same concept as hospitality. An organization that goes above and beyond to please the customer. And don't get me wrong, there are hotels that get this right for their internal customer. I can use the example of the Ritz-Carlton, who go to great lengths to make sure that their employees are absolutely impressed and delighted by the experience, and they are their best ambassadors. And that is a reason that they can charge top dollar and still maintain a very high occupancy rate across around the entire year. You see, that duck factor is a critical element in our differentiation in how we roll out our customer experience, our internal customer experience, how we differentiate ourselves from every one of our competitors, which are potential employers to our best employees. I would urge you that as we are done with this webinar, think about what your duck factor is. What is it that you can do that creates a memorable experience, a moment of truth for your employees and your team members? But I want you to keep in mind that today's luxuries are tomorrow's expectations. Just like I go looking for the duck today, in every hotel room or the duck factor, your employees will be looking for what's next. And this is why this is not a standalone initiative. It takes a lot of time and effort, and we have to put that in there because it is well worth it. As you put all of this together, you end up with 5 critical elements. That notion of employee centricity and experience, recognize what that looks like. The homework that you have to do to understand your employees and the fact that they're not all created equal. That this makes up a strategic plan that is a long-term in nature, and it reflects the growth of the business that you're looking for. You have to make sure that you've got an evidence-based human capital culture. It is really driven about your people, and it's measurable, so we know where we stand and your employees are constantly informed and up to date on it. And it's about making it memorable, recognizing that duck factor, and finding a way to differentiate yourself in the market, that moment of truth. Now, I want to share with you a case study, and I've put into the spotlight a company called ITA Group. Now, ITA Group is out in the United States. They're an events and incentives company, predominantly in the technology space, in the sense that most of what they do is really driven by tech for the various events and the incentives that they run. They're headquartered in Des Moines, Iowa. They were founded in 1963. They've got 533 employees, and their revenue is $175 million. So by all accounts, they're considered a mid-sized company, not a large company. And the reason I've highlighted them is it shows me that this is possible for organizations that are mid-sized, that are growing. They've got a couple of hundred people, and it's possible for companies that have been around for ages. In fact, this happened at their 50th anniversary. ITA Group had decided that, look, we've been around for 50 years. And while most people would say, listen, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, their chairman and CEO recognized that something had to be done. That essence or that energy that they had when they first started was not necessarily there. They were doing well. Their employees were there. Some of them were very long-time employees, but something had to be different if they were going to stick around for another 50 years. So they're about to come out to their 60th anniversary in a couple of years' time. And so on their 50th, though, they set out to create a culture transformation. And this involved a number of things. But of course, it started by understanding where their people are. They went out with a company-wide survey, 100% anonymous. It wasn't about rating people, but they discovered the benefits, the initiatives, the motivators that their employees had. And it was a very honest survey. People told them outright what they felt. It was custom designed for them to understand where their people are at and how they felt about the organization. Now, from there, they went out and created, they set out a plan for employee engagement, from dress code to revamped recognition programs to increased flexibility. They took all of the information and recognized, what can we do that really doesn't cost us a whole lot? They were already doing recognition programs, but they weren't fit for purpose. They had a dress code that they said, do we really need that? Our people are the heart of the organization. What do we need to do to make them comfortable? And even flexibility in working hours and when they come, where they go, and all of that stuff. And that worked for them as an organization. But it went a little bit deeper than that, obviously. They established goals and a brand story. And as I mentioned earlier on, this is what it's about. Our ability to tell that tale, to make sure that it's a journey that we're going on, and we recognize our value proposition is a key aspect of what we're doing. And if you think back, I mentioned that C-suite has to start to think of this like marketers do. It's about brand campaigns and brand campaign management that has to get us through there. That means there's a story to tell, like every great brand that's out there, but it's one that we're telling for our internal customer, not the external. Beyond that, they actually set out on a communication plan and campaign. They ensured that the culture and the desire that they have for the future deeply resonated with each team member. And I think that's a very important aspect that's there. Now, beyond that, I want to share with you the results. 16 months after they launched on this initiative, this is what happened here. They had a 41% increase in hired employee referrals. That means they were no longer dependent on announcing job vacancies in the company. 41% of those were, the increase that happened was coming from referrals inside. And I can tell you that this is one of the greatest measures for how well an organization is doing. When you cannot wait to get people that you know, your friends, your family, colleagues, whoever it might be, to work with you. I think that says, it speaks volumes about the type of organization and the culture that's there. They had a 97% employee retention rate, which, by the way, they have maintained until today, the 2020 results. That's their employee retention rate. They had a 20% increase in peer-to-peer and manager-to-peer recognition. And I think this is critical. It tells us that people are proud of those that they work with. It tells us that managers are more activated and they want to share they want to tell their employees how well they're doing. And that's really fantastic to see. They had a 27% increase in team member inspiration about the future. And they've been testing this on a quarterly basis. And their employees tell them the future is extremely bright. We're excited about this. We can't wait to contribute more. And I think this is really a very big driver when it comes to the culture transformation. And then there's a 95% plus customer retention rate. And that's, again, as recent as the 2020 results, despite this having been done in 2013. They are retaining their customers at unbelievable rates. And I know for any of you that are business owners on this call, or CEOs or C-suite, you recognize the importance of having such a retention rate in the organization. It is absolutely crucial. Now, for those of you that are more business-minded and you're telling me, Edward, this is very nice, 41% increase in referrals for employees and so on, retention and what have you, great. What about the business? For the last decade, they have been enjoying double-digit revenue and operating income growth. That means we recognize that the culture transformation they've done has had a direct impact on their bottom line. It is not just about the employees It is not a nice to have. It's not about, can we provide them with an extra day off a year? It's genuine culture transformation that's happening within IKEA Group. They have delivered volumes of business. They have delivered value to their employees, and the numbers back it up. So I urge you, when we talk about culture transformation, think about the value and the benefit that's longer term. Ensure that it's aligned with your strategy and it is part and parcel with your strategic plan. It's not a standalone. Look at creating a fantastic customer experience. Make sure that you roll it out with the end in mind, your employees and how they will come back to pay it in spades when they feel that value. Simon Sinek had once said that customers will never love a company until the employees love it first. And I cannot think of more truer words. And that really highlights the value and importance of a culture of transformation if we intend to future-proof our organization to all of the ups and downs, the crises that are happening, that they stand right by us in order to achieve the results that we're looking for. With that in mind, I've noticed that some of the questions are coming in and we are a few minutes ahead of time. I would love to open it up to any questions that there might be there. Yoshi, if you would be so kind, if there are any, please do let us know. We've had a request for the slides. We'd be happy to make them. We're actually going to make them available online, as a matter of fact. So please feel free to access that when we do. Any questions that I'd be happy to answer, of course. Sadiq, we've got a raised hand. I'm not sure if we can unmute Yoshi.
I have unmuted. Yes, go ahead, please.
Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you very much for that webinars. We enjoy very much and we get the very valuable information. My questions is regard how to promote the cultures of transformations inside the organization. There is a steps I can do it simply. I can promote the cultures for my employees.
So a great question, and thank you so much for asking it. I would say, look, any one person, I often say it takes more than one person, it takes a village. And more importantly, it has to be driven from the top. If we have leadership that does not believe in it, it's not going to happen. And if you recall earlier on, I started with a slide that said, feet talk. So it is more than promoting via words or saying we have to do this and we have to build it. It's action that has to happen. It is a genuine belief that our values of the organization are being lived. They're being demonstrated on a day-to-day basis. But it has to be driven from the very top. That is not an excuse for any one person not to take charge of this and say, you know what? I'm responsible for my culture. I'm responsible for the future of the organization. That's definitely a critical element as well. So I believe that as an individual, it's about living the values of the organization on a day-to-day basis, preaching what's fantastic about the organization, and proving to people that you walk the talk. If you're a part of leadership, I think you've got a much bigger responsibility, which is really going out there and setting the stage for a genuine culture transformation that's happening. I'm going to take a quick look here. Thank you so much for the remarks that are coming in there. Really fantastic. There is a question that came up in the chat box about how important do you think the role of diversity is in building an interdependent culture? I think that's a fantastic question, and I'll explain. Look, it plays a critical role without fail. I think it's something that we don't factor in often. We feel that, look, we're running it, it's for everybody, Shyam. But the reality is, as I said earlier, people have different needs and requirements. So does age, gender, nationality, any of that stuff play a role? Absolutely. I think for those of us that are dialed in from the UAE, we're a perfect example of diversity that happens on a day-to-day basis. Some 190 nationalities working together, probably from the ages of 22 to about 60. We've got an amazing dynamic, definitely great backgrounds and gender diversity when so many of the organizations are at that 50-50 or 40-60 marker. So it does play a role. And I would say that I would embrace that when you think that for those of you that have that level of diversity, take advantage of it. It creates such a wonderful dynamic within culture. The learning experiences that are there, experience that's brought in because of age that's brought into the organization, different perspectives, and the true culture by nationality, I'm saying, all of these really factor in there. And I find that if we disregard it, we're creating pockets of independence rather than interdependence. So I do think it plays a very, very important role when it comes to that. We've got a question that's come in about the success factor of culture transformation for the APAC region, Vietnam. Really an amazing question there. We've actually have a business partner out in Vietnam. And I can understand, I think, where you're leading to this. The business model is different. There's a lot of gaps. Look, I think while we vary culturally, I think there's a very similar aspect in our need as employees across the organization. That hierarchical nature is becoming less and less valuable in companies. That does not mean we're doing away with titles and so on, but rather it's just playing a lesser role where we either fear leadership or we do as they tell us rather than as they show us. So I think there's a lot more work to be done in certain cultures, but I think as employees, the need is very, very much the same and really valuable to utilize. So I think it's about having a look at your people makeup and who they are and how we can get them to get further ahead. A question that's come up: if you have an employee that's frustrated enough to leave while you know he's a key player, again, it's not surprising. I talked earlier on about serving the fingertips and serving them well. And fingertips does not have to be a lower level employee. It's a key player that's there. And if they're dissatisfied or frustrated and they're leaving, it means that somebody elsewhere is actually providing them a better opportunity. They're showing them something more valuable. And we're not doing a good enough job. And I don't think, for those of you that are people managers on the call, it's not about, well, I'm going to wait for senior leadership to do something. I'm going to wait for a top management or the CEO. Not at all. If you're a people manager and one of your team members is leaving, it is just as much as your responsibility as everybody else. It's not about pushing the ball or the responsibility to say, well, hey, this is bigger than me. Not at all. I think that everybody is responsible for that, and we've got a responsibility to be able to do that and apply it on a day-to-day basis. There's a very interesting question on the model or methodology we use. Now, certainly we use our own methodology when it comes to culture transformation and the processes that we follow. But here's something I want you to keep in mind. Culture transformation has to be unique to every single organization. We've worked with banks in Kuwait, technology companies in Jordan, multiple in Abu Dhabi and Dubai, from government entities to private enterprise. Every single organization that we work with our clients is a unique scenario. Our model remains the same, but we have to break it out into to fit the organization that's there and what their specific needs are. Another follow-up question on that was, where does an organization start when it comes to this? I think, again, it starts at the very, very top. Almost every example that I've just given you from government entities in Abu Dhabi, private enterprise in Dubai, Jordan, Kuwait, Saudi, it started with the CEO and the executive team. It was somebody at the top saying, hey, we have to deal with this instantly. There's something that's desperately needed, and they're dealing with that. So I find that, again, if it's not driven from the top, it's relegated to HR, to L&D. No, it's relegated to everybody, and it includes the senior leadership there. Mirella's got a question on what's the experience between organization culture in the West and the Middle East. I think a very interesting question that's there. There is a substantial amount of data to your question on organizations locally that evidence that. I know I shared on my LinkedIn page, I shared a post on a culture transformation initiative with the Abu Dhabi Department of Education and Knowledge. So I can tell you firsthand the projects that we've been doing locally. As I mentioned, some of the countries, Kuwait, Saudi, Jordan, UAE, have been extremely successful. I think that today, particularly for us in the Middle East, which is made up of a relatively diverse population as well, it's not a whole lot different than the West, as long as it's driven from the very top. If it's something that, again, is set aside and here's a little budget, we want to do something, it's bound to fail. What ends up happening is employee recognition programs, and that's it, and we think we've solved our culture. It's far more deeper than that, and I think really it's something we have to look into to get it done right. There's another question on group conflict transformation. Very possible it does happen. Very interesting remark. I want to address this because there was somebody brought up COVID-19. I think it was Muhammad, if I noticed very quickly there. I believe that there has been, the impact has been twofold. With some of the clients that we've worked with, it has had a positive experience. And let me explain what that is. The positive experience is people have come together like never before, virtually, of course. The support networks, the mechanisms, checking in on employees and colleagues to find out what's going on. We were early on in the pandemic. I was talking to some clients, and some of the sessions that we were giving, they're hosting virtual chats, just a chat over coffee. People came together in a fantastic manner. Now, on the flip side of that, of course, is in certain areas, the fatigue that's come in there, the lack of connectivity was really an impact there. Now, as we start to go back to a level of normalcy and we're seeing companies open up and so on, we're seeing a very different experience that's there. We're seeing people really come back and desperately want to cling to one another, which is really also fantastic. Another question that's come up is, how long does it normally take to establish an organizational culture? The minimum typically we see is about 12 to 18 months to start to see the results. You can start to establish the culture within the first 6 months, but to the tail end of that, not instantly. So there's a lot of steps that go in there from the wider scope with leadership as you move to cascade to mid-management, all with internal activities that go in there. And then it allows to create those ambassadors and champions, and you'll start to see about the 12 to 18 months, you'll start to see the results show up, which is really fantastic. Tahani's question, how do you deal with those EORs, the negative 20% of employees? We often say promote them out of harm's way to the competition, but that's definitely not the case. I think that, look, these people are there, and I think that when you have a strong enough wave within the culture of the company, people are either getting on or they're getting off or out. It's not a matter of putting them aside and so on, but I believe that the strength of good far outweighs the strength of evil. And if we do a good job at it, I think there'll be a lot of buy-in that's there, and it'll definitely work. Question on, you can't influence corporate, but only your business unit. And, great question, Sam, that you've brought up. I think this is a matter of getting leadership. And you mentioned the business unit. If you are a business unit director, business unit manager, I think there's a great opportunity to really work with your colleagues on that. But that does not mean that I'll wait to get everybody on board. It's about getting everybody, getting your team looked after. And what will happen there is one of two things. Your colleagues in the same level will realize that, you're making us look bad, and they've got to do something about it, or again, they'll ignore that, and you'll get to be known as somebody who's really looking after their employees, setting the right culture, the right tone from the very top, which is really very important. So I would not ignore that and wait for others, but definitely jump on board to do it yourself. A question, in your experience, does this also work if I start to implement transformation only in my department? It does. I can assure you of that. However, I can tell you that getting your colleagues and the other department heads or leads on board is just as important, and I would urge you to look into that. So is it possible? Is there a quick win? I think your people are your priority, but you and your people are still the same employee bag, and you fit into the greater purpose of the organization, and that's why it's so important to make sure that's created there. Tanseem's question on how important is open and transparent communication and feedback. I think it is absolutely critical. Look, with most, if not all of our clients on culture transformation, we've done away with annual engagement surveys. We use a live 24/7 dashboard. It's constantly working. It provides anonymous feedback and transparency. It's a full 360, and people fill it up on a weekly basis, so it's actual real data. So I think that, to your point on transparency, yes, open communication, yes, but we have to give people the tools to be able to do that, not tell them to do so, but then they feel a little bit awkward or they might be reprimanded, which certainly does not work, and we wouldn't have we certainly would not have an advantage there. Thus, there's a question, what could the possible disadvantage, how to overcome them? Honestly, I have yet, in all the years that I've been doing, I've yet to see a negative impact of a positive culture. I think if we spend the time and effort and we build it, we're actually doing ourselves a favor, we're doing the organization a favor. The only time that it doesn't work is simply when people have not bought in. There's no real value. You're on a different path or direction than your employees would love to see from you. Another great question from Shyam: how to link culture values with the mission vision? I think they're 100% linked. When we start an initiative, we start with the company's vision. We move on to the values. From the values, we have our behaviors. The behaviors, we have rituals, and it cascades all the way down. They are fully linked. There is no way. I don't believe in having a vision that is simply unattainable. It sounds nice. It's really cool on the walls and to start a meeting with, but nobody believes it. That doesn't work. And the same goes for our values. We've come up with some crafty words, but that's what they are, just words, and we're not living them. That certainly does not work, and it's something that we have to really make sure that we look into this as a key element that's there. Let me see if there's any other questions. I'm wondering if I have answered all of them. I think it looks like it in the Q&A. I'm going to go to the chat box, and thank you so much for those of you that are sending wonderful, wonderful remarks. I really appreciate that. There was a question that why is culture transformation difficult to handle? The simple answer, it requires an enormous amount of work. And I don't think we should be afraid of that. I think the fact that it requires work is our responsibility to deliver on that. We owe it to our employees. I don't believe that just because an employer pays their employee a salary and has given them the opportunity to work, we've done our job. Not at all. I think we have a responsibility to make sure that that work is fulfilling and the work experience, the environment that they're in is vibrant enough that they want to stay and they want to tell people about it. That is our responsibility as employers. So as difficult or as cumbersome as the responsibility is on culture transformation, we should not shy away from it, but rather hit it dead on and make sure that we say, hey, we're going to do this. It requires an investment of time, energy, resources, but it's well worth it because every single study you'll see out there, the bottom line results are just as impacted as our people and the emotional state that they're in. So it's definitely well worth it to do so. A couple of more that are coming in. I see one it needs passion, huge energy to get a success. Absolutely. I 100% agree with you, Sam. It does require a lot of that, and I think it's very, very doable. We've been very fortunate and blessed with a lot of the clients that we worked with, and we've set up their culture transformation because you see the results that are coming in there. You see the environment that's changed. With some of our clients, we've created a culture book, which is a hardcover. Now we do the digital version as well, which is a reminder of what they do and what they live through every day, why they love and appreciate the organization that they're in, which is just as important as well. And I think that's really key. I'm trying to see if I've missed any, and I apologize if I have.
Edward, there are a couple of questions in the Q&A.
Okay, I thank you very much, Yoshi. I appreciate that. Dr. Rashad asks, how to cultivate compassion in the organization? What a beautiful question and a beautiful word to bring up. Look, compassion, I think, is critical, and this is it's a human element. It's not a corporate one. You can even have compassion as a value, but it's not going to work unless we have compassionate people within the organization that are doing that. So it really talks about the way that you hire and the way that you train and the way that you look after the managers, because that's where that compassion comes through. I often refer to middle management in organizations as the hinge of the organization. They are the connectors of senior leadership and the front line. And that means we really have to make sure that they are well equipped, that they feel that sense of belonging, that desire, that growth and contribution that I talked about in the redefined Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And if they're not having that, it'll be very impossible for them to apply compassion. So, Dr. Rashad, for you, if you are a leader of people, I think it's about you showing compassion to your team members, your management and leadership team, which subsequently they will pay it forward in return. So it is about by demonstration, by creating that opportunity for people to feel loved, appreciated on a corporate perspective. Georgina's got a question on what is the key to emotional well-being. I think today, fatigue, overworked, the lines are blurred between work from home and work and our personal life and so on. I think giving employees the space to be themselves, to really look after us and look after the organization, I mean, is a critical one. But that means the organization looking after them as well. And I don't think there's enough of that being done. So a critical element that's there. And I think we have to make sure that we align ourselves on that. Manila had a follow-through question on, can a department start by establishing culture within their team? Again, I know we've answered that before. The answer is 100% yes. I prefer when it's top-down, without a doubt, because we're getting buy-in where it matters, and it's that message at the very top that people are looking for and listening for. However, as a manager of people, it is still my responsibility to look after my team. They may not feel the same way about the organization, but at the very least, if I can make sure that they feel loved within my team and appreciated, and they feel that they love coming to work for that very purpose, I think there's a lot of value there. And I do believe that great culture is infectious in a good way. It spreads like wildfire. People are excited. You'll notice other employees saying, I want what they have. And while that's sometimes an issue for other managers when they say, well, hang on, you're again, as I said, making me look bad, they have an opportunity. Do something about it. And I think that's really very key to making it happen. Joanna's asked, how do you distinguish between the human and corporate elements? I think that's a very interesting question, Joanna. I think they're one and the same. I don't believe that there are corporate elements per se, because the company is an inanimate object. It's made up of people from top to bottom. And I think when we forget that and we say, well, hang on, this is corporate, this is policy, this is procedure, this is how we run a business. If we've taken the humanity out of business, it's not much of a business or corporation anymore. So I do think they go hand in hand. I think the human element or humanity is part and parcel to the corporate experience. And the sooner we realize it, the much better off we are as an organization, because then we can create a sense of alignment across the board. Sam, I think I've answered that with regards to culture change when you can't influence the corporate, but only your business unit. I believe we have, so I appreciate that. Thus, we have another question. What could be the possible disadvantage? Oh, I apologize. I believe I've answered that as well, if there are any. So with that in mind, I don't see any other questions coming in here. So I really appreciate this. Folks, I urge you, the more that you can focus on your experience with employees, the driving force of your organization. And remember Sinek's words, a customer cannot love a company if the employees don't love it first. We have a moral responsibility and obligation just as much as a corporate responsibility and obligation to genuinely look after our employees and create a genuine culture of transformation. With that in mind, I wish you the very best of luck. Thank you so much for everybody that tuned in. And I wish you all of the best as you move forward with your own culture of transformation within your organizations.